Trauma explains, but it doesn't excuse or justify your actions. Oh, how I hate that turn of phrase. Sometimes it's right, but it has such blind spots that it makes it completely inoperable, especially in the current topic, discussing Jax. Does that get your attention? Welcome. A few things in advance. This video will be spoiling 3 pieces of media: The Digital Circus, Berserk, and Full Metal Alchemist. I highly recommend all series if you can stomach them, especially on Berserk. And while I will be defending Jax quite a bit in this video, I need to make one thing clear. Jax can simultaneously be justified in how they reacted to Ribbit and be a piece of shit. How do I square that circle? Wait a little bit and we'll get there. But before we get to that point, there's one more thing we're going to have to make clear. Well, two, I suppose. The first one is the definition of justification. I'm sure with me saying that Jax is justified in what they did would turn quite a few people off. After all, colloquially, we more use justification as being the right action, the right choice, which means it's the good one. Sure, it was awful that so many people died in the Death Star when it exploded, but you can't say that it wasn't justified to blow up the Death Star. That's what people's minds go to. But, and I know this is the most nerd shit imaginable, well, why don't we go to the definition of the word? Editing me? Pop it up right here. Justified means having a valid reason, being shown to be right or reasonable. And there's 2 other sections here we should probably talk about. Reasonable/warranted. Actions, decisions, or beliefs backed by good evidence or an acceptable explanation. And philosophy and law part. Proof or valid backing. In espiology, known and classically defined as justified true belief, meaning you have a good reason to hold a belief, regardless of its absolute truth. Look at the definition. It can mean that it was the good thing to do, but that isn't saying that it's always that. You can have a reasonable response, and it can be a bad thing. But just using a definition does seem like that'd be a little bit too weak. So, since we're talking about trauma, and we're basing our arguments on that, why don't we get started on something that, for most people, would be a justified reaction to a trauma while doing something wrong? Let's go and give some grace, though, to the first definition that I lambasted at the start of the audio. Your trauma does not justify or excuse what you do. Why do I hate that one so much? Well, there's a few times that one comes in handy. For instance, I have mild hallucinations. It's for that reason I can't really be in the dark. Because my mind will conjure up, from the distinct shapes I can barely make out in the darkness, things that no rational mind would come up with. And I live inside of an area that does have coyotes. So, let's say that I was in the dark inside my living room, and I believed that one of the chairs in the darkness was in fact a coyote. And let's add on a fantastical element to make this even more justified, that I had been previously mauled by a coyote, and I thought that's what it was. Well, I'd be justified to be scared as shit. I wouldn't be justified, and it wouldn't excuse my actions if in my fear I threw somebody beside me in front of it. My trauma of believing that I was genuinely in danger from a brain injury, which is what generally hallucinations are, wouldn't excuse me throwing another person in front of the danger so I could escape. My trauma in this situation would explain why I was throwing somebody in front of it, because I genuinely thought that I was in fear of my life. But it wouldn't excuse my behavior, as I would be inherently selfish outside of my trauma. The situation would reveal something of myself, but it wouldn't excuse it. In this area, in this specific example, the turn of phrase is correct. But for this to be true, the trauma has to be something real, yes, but not directly related to the situation. I made an irrational choice, but it revealed something on my character, because I was still making a choice to throw my friend in front of me. What about a different situation where you aren't able to make a choice, where your mind isn't in control of its own faculties? Like, I assume that we're all adults here, I can say the word. A woman was raped multiple times, and she finds herself, after heavily drinking, inside of a man's room. She doesn't remember consenting to be there. Now, isn't that a valid reason to not really be in control of yourself? Would anyone say otherwise? I would hope not. And in that moment, she wouldn't be in control of her own faculties, especially if she's been victimized multiple times. So her body, her lizard brain, takes control, and she happened to put a knife inside that person's throat. For some, they may say that this is obviously justified. If a woman is so blackout drunk that the next morning she can't even remember consenting to be in your room, then the boy was obviously taking advantage of her. But it's entirely possible that they didn't mean to. Does that make it better? After all, a lot of people don't understand consent, especially around a certain age, especially a lot of men. But does that excuse it? Well, we don't know. After all, the person's dead now. We will never know in case that person did have good faith intentions or was purposely taking advantage of her. Still, I would personally more land that the reaction was justified, but it was wrong still. For this reason, I don't like the turn of phrase that your trauma doesn't justify your actions. In this example, this woman would not be in control of her faculties. She'd be having a psychotic break because, yeah, she believes she just got raped after she's been repeatedly raped multiple other times. She's not really going to be consciously making decisions at that moment. And sure, she did kill somebody, but she didn't consciously choose to do that. But you're going to say it doesn't justify her reactions. That her psychotic break meant nothing, that it didn't excuse any actions even though she had no control of her faculties? You're really gonna be that much of a dick? That much of a cruel, uncaring bastard? You'll turn to that again? It's for this reason that I don't like it. It can fit a lot of traumas. It can fit a lot of traumas that are not directly related to the situation, but the highest form of trauma response is when your brain is no longer something you can control. It's no longer you in the pilot seat. When you're not in control of your actions, it falls flat. It's for that reason I don't like that turn of phrase, and I have a different one which I more prefer, which is what we're going to be using for this video, and why I've set up everything here, to help lay a bit more groundwork. Your trauma doesn't justify or excuse your actions? Bad, terrible, completely falls apart in case you know quite a bit about trauma. Your trauma doesn't save you from the consequences of your actions. True, real, something that is able to accommodate traumas that aren't so easily understood. After all, while we may agree that the second person that's been a rape victim and caused a violent action due to a psychotic break due to their trauma is justified in reacting in that way since they couldn't recall what had happened when they had been drinking, which led to a reasonable belief that they had been raped again. I'm sorry, but they did a murder. Hopefully, there would be more kind consequences and understanding, but there would still be consequences because the girl murdered somebody. This is what we're dealing with. So, with this context in mind, I want to talk about two characters outside of Jax. One that was fully justified in what they did, despite it being terrible, and another which did do a terrible thing, and it wasn't justified. Now, this is your last warning. I am going to be spoiling Berserk and Full Metal Alchemist. If you want just a little bit of a new perspective on Jax from this one, I hope it gives you a little bit of that. But I'm going to be referencing both these characters when I'm talking about Jax. So again, if you don't want any spoilers on Berserk or Full Metal Alchemist, don't continue with this video. This is your final warning. Okay? Alright. Let's start with the fan favorite hero, Roy Mustang. For those unaware, Roy Mustang is a very cool character, and is definitely somebody which is in more of the hero role, but they're not the main character. And there's a few reasons for that, narratively speaking, but one of the big ones that's very important, which I do think a few fans that just see the really cool hype moments forget. Roy Mustang, and this is an important part of his character, is a piece of shit. In fact, one of the coolest moments in my view is to understand that a lot of the army members, with their really cool scene that happens near the end, have a realization and are doing the things that they are doing because they know they're pieces of shit. And by going over on what's probably a suicide mission, they can perhaps slightly redeem themselves. Because, for those who somehow don't know this and want to go over and get spoiled on one of the best anime, Roy Mustang partook in a genocide. This is kind of laid out pretty clearly inside the base government because the governor is literally called Fiore. Like it's very clear what the government inside of it is supposed to emulate. And Roy Mustang, along with so many other soldiers, willingly partook in that system. There are some background elements inside the series of like, oh, the reason the genocide happens because the big bad wanted the land for a different thing, but dude, they did a genocide. And while obviously with the government having a Führer, you're supposed to make a certain connection towards them, but outside of when the Nazis were losing, there isn't a direct one-to-one if you use Nazis as the example. And there's one other example, which I think makes it better to have an understanding of who Roy Mustang is morally, along with so many other characters that we adore. Roy Mustang was an IDF soldier. Does that ruin your goat somehow? Knowing and acknowledging that they are that type of evil? Sidebar, if anyone that watches my content on Maine is surprised I don't like the IDF, you have not paid attention to my content. I'm just going to say that. I don't like them. But that's what Roy Mustang was. It's an important part of his and many other people's character that they were indoctrinated and made to believe that this was an existential threat to their country that they so adore and love, when in reality, they weren't. And they just genocided a country. Which, if you pay attention, you may notice that a lot of the people inside the country that we realize are of a darker complexion. I wonder what that could mean. But that's an important part of their character. And yes, they were indoctrinated. And yes, they grew up inside of this culture. And the army, specifically, which we already see in a later installments, is very fucked up. So, they must be the reason that I'm talking about it, right? I said there was two characters, and one was justified, and one wasn't. And even if somebody did something justified, it doesn't mean it's right. I must have been talking about Roy Mustang, right? Because, like, being in a fascist state like that and growing up in that environment and being part of the army, like, with the facts available to him, like, it sucks and it was evil and awful, but he must be the example of doing something that's justified but still being wrong. And that can be awful, but it's not completely morally incriminating because, they went over and were willing to spend their lives to go over and take care of the problem once and for all. That's what I'd be doing, right? I wouldn't say that the opposite, right? That Roy Mustang was unjustified and actually Griffin was the one who was justified, right? That'd be insane. Well, let me walk you through it. Yes, there are a lot of reasons that the soldiers did what they did. And I was debating when I was making this video and setting things up for it rather quickly. Is it actually justified in narrative? Like, does the story perspective more present these people as being justified but wrong? And as I said, I've been watching Fullmetal Alchemist recently, and the answer is no. From episode 1, we are shown that you could have rebelled, you could have fought against it, that there were means and ways for somebody to realize, even in the state and even after doing what they did, that it was wrong. Our first antagonist is somebody who realized that after all. This is an important piece of the story. Roy Mustang, by the narrative, along with so many other soldiers and other characters that we love, aren't given an out. And that was planned from the start. What they did was perhaps justified, you could say. Maybe it made some sense. But staying to it, staying true to all of those beliefs for so much longer, they could have rebelled. Because there are other soldiers that did exactly as they did, and did. They're not given an excuse. This is what I more mean. That this character, well, cast of characters, are all completely and utterly unjustified, and in my view, completely unredeemable. Much like real IDF soldiers, and yes, I'm going to keep hammering that point home, but the point of Roy Mustang's story, and something I want you to keep in mind when we're talking about Jax later, is all of the soldiers, Roy Mustang included, did not believe they were redeemable when they were going over on that fight. But are you only gonna do good things because you want a cookie, that you get a cupcake? No. You don't need to do good because it will redeem you. You do good regardless. That is the point of their story. That regardless of being irredeemable bastards and bitches, they still decide to do good at the end of the day, despite knowing it wouldn't save their souls. Because regardless of your opinion on yourself, doing good is still good. Despite the fact that you don't think that it will redeem you or make you better or make up for what you did wrong. Keep that in mind when we're going to be talking about Jax later. So, we've gone through our first of these two characters. Roy Mustang and his crew are unjustified and possibly, at least in my view, irredeemable, despite the good things they do. But that means... Wait, wait. Am I saying Griffin did nothing wrong? Am I one of those truthers unironically? Oh my god, this video is ruined. Ruined, I say. No. I ask people to look back at the title. Justified does not mean redeemable. Nor does it mean good. As we talked about at the start of this video, which has already been like over 18 minutes, all you need to be justified is that you did a reasonable action with the facts and beliefs that you had at the moment. it doesn't mean that you did something that makes you redeemable, or even that you did something good. Somebody can do something justified and, not knowing all the facts or not being in a logical state of mind, be wrong. And that is how Griffin is. Because let's run through his story, and we're also going to pay attention to the narrative as well, because this is an important part of both the character theming, that the narrative supports if what they did is justified or not. So, Griffin, smart guy, handsome guy, going over, leading the entire band, being a great hero for what happens, and then gets captured. Okay, that's terrible. Then gets tortured. Oh, that's really bad. But like in a lot of anime, they're able to take the torture and then just keep go. He's permanently disfigured. And he's permanently in pain. Oh god, he got sexually assaulted. Uh, huh. Well, Griffin can keep on going. There's gonna be like, there seems to be some stuff that's a little bit weird in the world, so obviously he's gonna be able to recover. Oh no. This is a sequence of events that will occur. And it's easy for us on the outside to go over and call Griffin for what he is, a selfish fucking bastard. But again, remember, justification does not equal good morality. He can still be a selfish fucking bastard I want to die without being, unjustified in what they did. Because I want to sit you down here. Let's go through more in detail what state of mind Griffin was in when he made that choice. He was captured, sexually assaulted. Already, by that vow, he's not going to be mentally sound. 2, he has been tortured. Again, a huge amount of mental damage. And with that level of deformity, yeah, he's not going to be in a good state of mind. And then afterwards, he is constantly in physical pain and exhaustion. And he was sexually assaulted. Let me turn the question around. Would any of us be in a state of mind where we're able to deal with that? The best people to ask would be those who have both chronic pain and chronic exhaustion symptoms. Now, I do not understand these conditions too fully, and they come in many myriad of forms, but this is basically what more happened to Griffin. He was going from a fully healthy body towards one that was chronically in pain and exhaustion. So, if anyone stumbles on this video that has these type of conditions, or knows somebody who does, I want you to imagine being in that position. That one day you're healthy, having a fully functional body, and then you're in a state where you have chronic pain and chronic exhaustion for months on end, and being told this will be for the rest of your life without any medication. And the fact that you had a healthy body to compare it to. This isn't the condition you were born with. That would make somebody more resentful. And somebody was sexually assaulted. And you know that in the state that you're in, if it's not somebody close or trusted to you, you will be a victim again. If Griffin doesn't have members of his band near him, or even if they do, after being assaulted like that, any person could take advantage of him. He's too weak to be able to fight back. The torturer made sure of it. And that's something that specifically the torturer did to break him into this distress. After being a victim like that, without therapy, without medication to take care of your chronic pain and chronic exhaustion, and after being in a state where you were being tortured into this for multiple months, well, of course he would make that choice. Of course he would pay anything for the security to know he's not going to get raped again. And of course he's going to be making the choice to sacrifice everything when he's in so much pain and anger, especially towards his friends that didn't save him in time. It's not a rational choice, but it's one that makes sense. It's not rational, it's reasonable. And like I did for Roy Mustang, we must look at the narrative of Berserk. And the thing is, for a large part of the story, and this is very central to the narrative, fate is a thing that exists inside of it. And that due to the God Hand, fate is malicious. All of the things which I've talked about are justifications. They're reasons that inevitably Griffin would have made the choice that he did as soon as he was tortured and had the pendant. It was inevitable, you could say. And it was because the malicious actors of fate, the God Hand, wanted Griffin to have this. Griffin didn't stand a chance. Unlike Guts, he was, well, bound by fate. Does that mean that actually Griffin did no wrong? That Griffin did nothing wrong? Because the God Hand was always controlling it? Is that the reason why? But no, fuck off. Regardless how the story ends, even in the most happy, picturesque version, where he's able to revive all the band, and, like, Griffin chose to do this, so we can make sure all of the God Hand die, or lose their power, so that way fate is no longer malicious. Griffin still raped somebody because of his own desires. There's likely no reason in narrative that he did it. And yes, Griffin can be a complicated character. I swear on the moon. But he's still an evil bastard. Regardless, in case he does good by making sure the rest of the God Hands dies, and then purposely lets himself be killed by Guts, which I think there would be a subversion where somebody else kills him, from what I understand the narrative. Even if that was his intent, he'd still be a piece of shit. Even if he revives all the bands, he can't take away the trauma that he inflicted by raping somebody. We can say that yes, what Griffin did in sacrificing the band to be revived, the most vile action that the fandom goes over and talks about with him, was justified, as again, he is in chronic pain and chronic exhaustion after being purposely broken into that state and trusting nobody because, again, the fate had made sure that he was sexually assaulted and that he was too weak to ever be able to defend himself. He's going to be living in fear. This is an important part of when you look at, like, Griffin's characterization and how malicious the God Hand truly is, and making sure that there was no path out for Griffin except to become one of them. But, like, Griffin's still a piece of shit for everything else. So, with Roy Mustang, we have a good character that did something unjustified and was irredeemable, but still did good regardless. And with Griffin, we have somebody who's did something that was justified and is still an evil piece of shit that I really look forward to, fucking dying. So, those are the two contrasting elements that I wanted to be in your mind. And despite this being near half an hour long, we can finally talk about Jax. So, Jax. They are a trans girl. Their pronouns, I understand that, like, they didn't have time to discover themselves, so we have no idea what their pronouns would be. They're trans femme. It's very clear in the narrative and by Gooseworks. And with that context, we need to talk about two things. And I need to lay the groundwork for this before we talk about Jax as a character, and actually what they did fuck up, and what they should be hated for. One, Ribbit did fuck up. And I need to make clear, this is not victim blaming or anything else. The reason that Ribbit fucked up is that she's not a therapist. Of course she wouldn't understand this. And that the fuck up that she did was done with kindness. And there's a way that she tried to make it up, which makes the story so much more tragic, which I really hope that people, like, get it, because it makes it such a more, like, compelling tragedy, what happens to them. And for those who don't know who just watched the show, I am saying them specifically because that ribbit is she, they. What ribbit did was that due to their own trauma, they wanted to have a deep connection towards people. And due to the fact they couldn't have a connection anymore with their parents, they wanted to have a bond that was very strong and reassuring to them with Jax, somebody that they trusted. It's for this reason that when she reveals her personal story, she then has Jax respond, "I was homeless, what else would you want to know?" Which is Jax saying, "Hey, this is what I'm comfortable sharing right now. What else do you want?" And Ribbit, not being a therapist, says, "Do you trust me?" Pushing Jax to be open more than he would be comfortable with. Telling the entire story. And that on its own would be bad, but it wouldn't have ended up in tragedy. And I need to be clear here. Ribbit is trying to be supportive. She is fucking things up because she is not a licensed therapist. She is being a good friend, but she's fucking up. Because her putting the bow on Jax and saying, "Oh, I get what was unsaid in that story. You're a trans femme." Which Ribbit would probably understand because, being she, they're probably not the most gender conforming of individuals. Was a sweet moment, and it made Jax fully relax to know that they were fully accepted as at least a trans femme woman. I'm going to be more saying from now on that they are. But even when Jax was willing to tell the story, they purposely didn't say they're trans femme. And this isn't a thing that like just Gooseworks is going over and doing from a meta-narrative perspective. In narrative, Jax is comfortable enough to tell them, "Oh, I have a really bad relationship with both my parents, and I think that I killed her." But above that, above thinking he killed his mom, she doesn't feel comfortable saying she's trans. That's what she told her mother and got laughed at for. In Jax's mind, irrationally, her saying that she's trans is something that's more scary than admitting that she thinks she killed her mom. This is the boundaries of what we are dealing with right here. If it was just the parent thing, after the calm down of saying, "I'm glad you trust me," probably the story would have gone okay. Maybe there would still be a blowback, but it's a lot less likely to be as bad. And Ribbit, being a kind person, wanted to comfort Jax for what was unsaid. Wanted to say, "Hey, I see you, and I accept what you didn't say out loud." But that meant that part of her that she wasn't ready for to be seen. She knew that Ribbit knew about it. The thing that was so scary that she didn't even say it towards somebody she felt comfortable telling that she felt she killed her mom to, knew that and the other thing. Of course, she would have freaked out. And does that mean that Ribbit deserved it? That she pushed over? No. Ribbit is a queer character that is trying to be kind. But she's not going to perfectly get it. She's not going to perfectly navigate the situation because her character wouldn't have given her the skills to do so. At least from what we know. So, Ribbit fucked up. And the thing is, Ribbit kind of knew that. Anybody wonder why nobody seemed to check up on Ribbit? Why nobody seemed to really reach out to her? Or Ribbit didn't seem to reach out to anyone else? Because for Ribbit to talk about what was wrong, they'd have to say the two secrets that she knows. She'd have to out Jax on either his trauma and specifically on the fact that she's trans to be able to soothe herself, to be able to have comfort and support. So she doesn't. Or maybe she didn't even try because she didn't feel comfortable that in her state she would be able to ask for support, ask for help, without accidentally outing her. Because of her love of Jax, she doomed herself. Isn't that such a more compelling tragedy? We can accept that Ribbit fucked up, and that she also wanted to make up that fuck up because Ribbit isn't evil, and that led to her demise. Like actual suicide, many different factors are at play. And I think that makes the story so much more compelling. Now, with that out of the way, we need to talk about something that I kind of alluded to earlier. It is very clear in the narrative, and even though, again, this is irrational, Jax sees them being trans as a heavier thing and thing they feel less secure telling, even to Ribbit, than the fact she thinks she may have killed her mom. How do you reach that state of mind? Like, I'm sure some cis people are watching this. So how does that happen? Well, I'm not Jax, but I was a Jax at one point. One of the reasons I want to talk about this video, and that I've gone through half an hour, 2 days of setting this video up, and like learning some new editing software just to make my first video essay on this specific topic, is because I used to be a Jax. Now, of course, my situations were different. I wasn't homeless, but I was 12. There was this girl. I had gone through a situation, I won't go too far into detail, but I had a Jax situation where somebody lashed out at me coming out. And that happened when I was around 9. 3 years later, much longer than what Jax had, I felt comfortable coming out towards somebody, which I didn't know at the time because I was 12, but that I had romantic feelings towards. That's what it took for me to feel comfortable telling somebody. And unlike what happened with Ribbit, I came out to them. But 2 other events happened, which aren't a part of Jax's story, but every situation like this is slightly different. The girl was very neat, in that she accepted me instantly. In fact, she took me to get into the one locked room, so that way I could throw on some of her clothes. Unfortunately, other people noticed that we were in the room alone. And a boy and a girl, both being in a room alone together, in a locked room, even if they're 12, led to certain suspicions. And the person that I had at 9, who scared me into not being trans, shamed me out of it, in a sense, was still a part of my life when I was 12. And they pushed and pushed. And I was 12. I didn't have a phone or another way to contact her for reassurance that she wouldn't tell anyone. And it became noticed that I would flinch whenever our telephone would ring. Eventually, I cracked. And I got worm-tongued, basically. I was led to believe that now I could never piss this person off. Regardless of us having such a close connection, if I ever made her angry, she would out me. Irrational. Bad. Not true. After all, I care about this person a lot. I loved them. And I loved them enough to come out despite the fear. And they accepted me. But with an outside pressure pulling on me, I believed it. And maybe some people are seeing this and saying that it was justified. After all, unlike Jax, I had an outside force that was forcing these ideas upon me. Unlike Jax, I was 12. But also, unlike Jax, I went on for a lot longer. It started when I was 12, running away from her, flinching, and if we did have mutual friends at that point, I would have told them not to trust her. same as Jax said. Because you're not rational when you're being like that. Your mind is so overdone with fear and anxiety because your brain is registering that as a threat to your life and a painful end as well. It's not logical. Like, I'm not likely to get lynched in Canada, of all places. But I didn't know that at the time. And sure, it's not a rational belief, but it was a genuine belief of mine. It took over 2 years after I had accepted that I was trans, after being in a much safer place emotionally, and after growing up and being 20, that I could handle those emotions. And even then, I felt a jackhammer in my chest when I wanted to apologize towards her. Partially because it was a public place, but still. Like Jax, it took me so long to apologize. In a relationship that could have ended romantically, I totally nuked. What I did was justified. Sure. Wasn't right. In reverse, Jax, despite being homeless, and despite lashing out so much, as it's a fictional story and a sign of their mental resilience, they were able to reach out. They were in the same state of panic, of irrationality, where you can't control your actions. You're more reacting like instinct. It's the emotional equivalent of somebody tapping your leg. But, despite that, Jax, at the end, was able to be in control of their mental faculties. In what must have at most been a month or two, they were able to take control of themselves. Partially because they're older, and partially because they're in the circus. But that is such a strong character move. In fact, we get 3 flashes. The last 3, you can rewatch the video of Goose's. But we see them try and go to the door. We see them on another day, most likely, waiting at the cafes to casually see if Ribbit will be there. And a third time, they go to the door. But they walk off. In the same way that I struggled after wanting to talk to somebody. The same way I struggled for 2 years to apologize. Jax did too. Unfortunately for Jax, they waited too long. And they can never take that back. That's something you can blame Jax for. Those last 3 days, they were in control of their faculties. They were finally able to make a choice. All the other actions were by instinct, pushing away, reactive, in the same vein as the first time that we more see Jax. Well, or at least see her interact with people, telling them to get away. That isn't a conscious choice, that's a reactive one. And we see reactions like that since Ribbit. But those last 3 show us she had control. And she didn't do a damn thing. Now, how much blame you can put on Jax depends. After all, Jax, like Pomni, didn't see the process of somebody abstracting. They knew about it in vague concepts, and at least from what we understand, unlike Pomni, they didn't see the end result of an abstraction. Jax was even more ignorant. So, I ask you, do you blame Pomni for not reaching out to Jax, despite knowing about extraction more than they did? Or do you only blame Jax? Because I want to let you in on one little fun final secret. Both of them blame themselves. Pomni, as confirmed by the creator, has the same survivor's guilt that Jax did. But she hasn't torpedoed all her relationships like he did. Both due to the different traumas. And for one other reason. Perhaps what happened with Rabbit was inevitable. Maybe it was fated. Maybe the dominoes that were stacked up made it so it could only end like this. Even if we take away the last 3 days that Jax had control of themselves, it's justified to have difficulty in reaching out. It's justified in not understanding how close somebody is to abstracting. But all the actions post Rivet, they were done because Jax believed that they were irredeemable. A complete piece of shit. They had just killed the 2 people that they loved the most because they came out to them. Because she was vulnerable with who she was. It resulted in the 2 women that she was closest to dying. So she threw everyone else away because she was nothing more than thorns that would drag them down and hurt them. She was completely irredeemable. She was undeserving of love, as she said herself. So of course she pushed them away. It's what's good for them. But Jax, the little bunny girl, is proven wrong. And you may recall at earlier parts of this video, I told you to keep a certain thing in mind. Roy Mustang is somebody they should have learned from. After all, we know Jax watched anime. And they should have remembered, even if you think that you are irredeemable, you can still do good. Doing good is good regardless. But Jax didn't take that lesson, and that's their failure. A girl believing herself to be too broken that she doesn't want anyone near her shards, because they're only cut themselves, resulting in even more harm. That is who Jax is post-Ribbit. And that attitude is an inherently selfish one. Disguise wanting to protect other people. That is what you can blame them for, along with the last 3 days. But their initial reaction, now that was justified. But what they still did was awful. And Ribbit consigned herself to her fate because she loved Jax so much. What a tragedy. You know, are we sure that Gooseworks isn't Grease? Anyway, this is an around 50-minute, little, I guess my first little video essay. My throat is kind of giving up, and I did have to lock the puppy up, because you may hear her sometimes inside the audio, because she keeps coming down here when I'm trying to record. And I'm sorry if I sound super pretentious during all this. I am sick recording this. I've had to take so many breaks to record this properly. So I'm sorry. Only a few voices that I can use, which don't sound pretentious as fuck when I'm trying to talk without having a coughing fit. Like, just talking like this is really getting me close to coughing. So, my apologies for that. And I hope, for those that do watch this video, that from somebody who used to be a Jax, you're able to get a new appreciation for a scene. I'm gonna keep that in. I've been having so many tongue twisters during this because I'm so sick. But that you get a new appreciation for the scene, because Gooseworks is trans, and Jax is the worst part of themselves during a certain part of their life. Gooseworks went to conversion therapy. They probably did react like this after that. Or at least that'd be my assumption as somebody who used to be a Jax. Their story is very complex, and I just got very angry at the fact that everyone was going over and making me miss identification. That because Jax can't be justified because that meant that they were right, that it was a good thing that what they did. Which no. As I hope that I made clear in this video, being justified doesn't mean you're right. It just means that you acted reasonably with the information and the stuff that you've gone through. Which, leads to your beliefs, which is in the first definition. Anyway, this is going to be I'm going to low edit this one to, just the characters, that I'm talking about in certain scenes, so that way I can actually get this video out in a timely manner. I hope the video is informative, and if it did teach you anything else, please let me know in the comments. Anyway, I'm going to go grab my puppy now, because she's barking up a storm, and I need to make sure that she's okay. Bye-bye.